So I think we can go
What
ahead.
about Gary Davis?
Oh, yeah, Gary Davis. I haven't heard from Gary.
My guess
Oh.
is that Gary probably won't be able to make it, but I'm not 100% sure of that. So. He's been participating remotely.
Well, we can go ahead and get started then.
How's Tim?
Tim's good. Tim's tired.
Sounds right.
Let me just pull up the agenda on here.
Tim's got lots of family coming this weekend.
That always makes it fun, doesn't it?
Gosh, we didn't invite anybody and they all just said we're coming. It's like, okay.
So we don't have any referrals, so we can go straight to the overlay district.
Maybe before we get into that, Bob, I think it's the first time everybody's been in person in a while, right? And then in this room. So some of you may be familiar with these maps and some of you might not. I know, Bob, you have, because you and I kind of came down and went through some of them one day, but what we've tried to do is a lot of our planning documents have maps associated with it. And so we've put those, printed those out and put those in this room. Everything from the map up here in the front to the right of the whiteboard here is the conservation value rating for each of the parcels in the town of Canandaigua, from the open space plan, the historic sites. Back behind Kim is the strategic forest protection area. You can see on the map up there, and some of the oil fields. There's a zoning map directly behind Tim. That's our newest zoning map that includes the form-based code. Of course, you guys recognize that farm-friendly community sign there. And then over to the left of there is all of the, down to the right, you see a lot of the rivers, but you also have all the water lines and all the sewer districts and all the sewer lines up there in the middle map with the green and the yellows, the one that's up on the second, the higher level in the middle there, as well as a lot of the district maps. You've got drainage district over here kind of working our way around. Open space, you've got drainage districts there. The blue is our new scenic view shed overlay. That map correlates to the scenic view shed overlay that we've now adopted and is now part of town code. The elevations, and then of course you all are familiar with the strategic farmland protection area and that stuff here. So
That's really neat.
it is neat, especially, and I tell you, one of the things that they use this room for, this room has been getting used a lot by a lot of our different groups, but in particular, our Environmental Conservation Board uses this room when they're reviewing projects, and so they're able to glance at all the maps. Also, our Project Review Committee, our PRC, uses this room, the same thing. They're able to utilize a lot of the maps and stuff. And our ordinance committee. So they're really, you guys know the Ag Committee really worked super hard on that agriculture enhancement plan. And that was one of our very first planning documents, to try to identify a lot of our natural resources and a lot of the stuff that we talk about here in the Ag Committee. And then having these maps be very, very top of mind awareness as we're reviewing projects. That's really what we're trying to utilize this room for as we go through some of that stuff. Which leads right into the view shed overlay, right, Bob?
Yeah.
Because it's essentially what we're trying to do. So very cute, very cute.
My youngest daughter,
Granddaughter.
well, she's my youngest granddaughter. She was born to my youngest daughter.
Oh, here just
Oh, sweet.
I have a whole phone full of them.
Takes
That's why I
after-
don't bring
takes after
it.
Barb.
Pardon?
Takes after Barb.
Of course.
For sure.
I
That's not a
just
surprise.
forwarded the email from Fernando to you so that you'll have that too.
Bob and I met on this, and Bob, jump in here, and we were talking about some different ideas. Obviously, at the one meeting that we had, we talked about that area that is to the west of the town hall here. There's some of the best soils. Actually,
Boy, is
some of
it
these
wet.
prime soils, soils of statewide significance and everything. We were talking about this. And, one of the things, the challenges that we all constantly, I think, struggle with, Bob, and, you and I talked a lot about this, is if you put so many regulations in place that it becomes restrictive for the landowner to do something with their land. Is that really the avenue that you want to go in terms of taking away the ability for the landowner to do something different? Whether or not we like it, that's a different story, but about taking that right away, right? And so one of the things that I think that we discussed, and if I'm on the wrong track, Bob, jump in here, but one of the things we discussed is at least trying to get the town to limit their decisions, or at least taking into account the strategic farmland protection area to limit, for instance, infrastructure, to keep it from encouraging development in these areas where we don't necessarily want it, right? So,
Yeah, I reached out to Doug for some other ideas on this because I think the original plan was gonna be not very likely to be adopted by anybody, because it was too restrictive. And we don't just wanna, at least in the way I look at it, we're not trying to, if you just say we're gonna preserve farmland, you could just end up with land that actually doesn't end up being farmed, or end up being green space possibly, depending on how it works. The best way to preserve farmland, in my opinion, is somebody farming it, and that is more likely to happen if we can reduce some of that creep from developments. So if there's less sewer, water, less likely for that to happen. So that was Doug's recommendation, of maybe to focus on that instead of seriously limiting somebody's ability to do something. Because I can think of a lot of examples of, what do you tell somebody that is in retirement and somebody doesn't want to rent their land for farmland anymore? So what options do they have? The town's not going to buy it. The town shouldn't buy it, I don't think. So my thought was to try to look at a plan that would really put some restrictions on what the developers would want, which would help keep them out of the area. Is that?
yeah, so actually, what you're talking about, Bob, exactly. So look at this area here. Let's just use this example of this area that we talked about. I think the last time I met with you guys, and we talked about what do we do for this prime farmland right here, right? Because other than this heavy red marker line, the strategic farmland protection area, there's nothing really that says you can't put a housing development in here, right?
No.
Other than you have to have sewer to put in a housing development. Okay, so now look at that map up there, that top middle map with the green and the yellow and all the red lines. That's every single sewer line in the town of Canandaigua. Now, the good news is, if you look at that 5 and 20 corridor coming off of,
There isn't any.
right, I think everybody knows where that probably is there. But-
Yep.
Okay, so here's 5 and 20 right here, right? So this is that same area over there, where my hand is, basically where that green area is, over there, where all that prime farmland is, right? So the good news is, right now, as of today,
It's pretty good.
it's not in a sewer district. There's no sewer line. There's no sewer envisioned, right? So that's, the green here is sewer envisioned. The yellow is sewer envisionment undefined, and then you can see the sewer districts and stuff. There's actually another map that actually shows the sewer districts. You do have the hamlets. What are the two hamlets there, right? Putting you to test. It's Academy or not Academy. It's they're not official hamlets anymore, right? They're
Plainville?
No,
I can't think of the name of it.
Cheshire?
Oh, Cheshire's down
Cheshire's
here,
down
right?
here.
It's
Oh, Centerfield.
Centerfield, right?
Centerfield.
Yeah, thank you.
Centerfield, yeah.
Centerfield. But there is no sewer or anything. There is no sewer or anything there. So if we at least said to the town board, hey, and this is where this idea came from of this, not encouraging sewer into these areas that are inside of that red line. If we at least said to the town board, hey, we're asking you to pass a local law that essentially prohibits yourself from expanding, or at least considering not to expand sewer into these areas. as at least a step of protection that the town. Now, it may not go as far as some would like, but at least it would put it on the books that, hey, it's not a great idea. Just because Mr. Smith wants sewer there, we shouldn't necessarily run a sewer line, right?
When you say these areas, what do you prefer?
So
Referring to?
the proposed law is everything inside the red line,
Oh,
everything inside the strategic farmland protection area.
We were gonna shrink it down a little bit more, right?
We can.
Or not, what's your
We
thought
can.
on that to,
I left it broad right now so that we could have this conversation and then we could go back and revisit that.
I know that the feedback I got from some planning board members that they did, well, first they wanted me to let everybody know that they really like our referral comments. But they like the idea of a little bit smaller area because that helps them when they're looking at plans.
What do you mean by smaller area?
yeah.
Like we redrew it. You don't have a copy of that that you can pull up, do you? Did we ever put it
That
on?
map, just
Yeah.
that map, no, because we had just kind of drawn a circle in this area, I think generally, right?
And I think the reasoning on that was that some of the other stuff was in development, had been purchased for development rights.
Some of this area.
Yes,
up in-
higher. So we were gonna focus lower,
Right.
lower where some of the better soils were.
Some of the Paddleford Brook Greenway
There it is.
area has already gone into the protected status through the PDRs, yes. It's this area down here that's not in the Paddleford Brook Greenway, and there's actually, I don't think we have any protected parcels in this area here at all. We actually, I don't think I pointed out this map here. Let me just grab it and show you guys. This map is the map of all of the public and protected lands, and it also has the Paddleford Brook Greenway on it. So the hashtag here, now this date of this map was 2017, so there's been some new parcels that have gone in now, which is great, that are actually in the Paddleford Brook Greenway. A couple of parcels up and through here are now in this, but these are the protected lands either through PDR, purple here. Well, blue and purple, I guess, are PDR parcels here, because that's a PDR, that's a PDR, those are PDR, PDR, PDR. And then some of this other stuff is publicly owned lands. But again, it's this area, this 5 and 20 quarter over here, that there's nothing really protected, and that's some of the prime soils.
What are we calling prime soils?
Well, the US Geological Survey map, right, they identified prime soils based on certain classifications. And then that was when we did the agriculture enhancement plan. That was the mapping of all of this prime farmland here to match up with those ecological soils. And then the mapping, so essentially the green has been identified as prime soils. There's some spattering of green in other areas, obviously, but some of the largest concentration of these prime soils is this 5 and 20 corridor north and south of 5 and 20 west of the town hall, some of the most prime soils. The way that they rank those.
So if we made an overlay area, would then that outer red, the strategic farmland protection area go away?
Doesn't have to. I mean, it exists in the sense that it's in the adopted agriculture enhancement plan. So if we wanted it to go away completely, we would probably need to amend the agriculture enhancement plan, or if we were going to put I mean, because that strategic farmland protection area is actually not an overlay. There's no zoning at all relative to it. It's just a defined area, right? So we could create a new overlay and put over and above, but it's,
And I mean, as it is, the reason we're doing this is because the strategic farmland protection area doesn't really do anything.
it's
So
just
it
has no
identifies it.
teeth.
Could
Yeah.
we be more specific on the areas that we're talking about? You
Yeah.
mentioned, north and south of 5 and 20, exactly what do we need? And it would be interesting to see what the overlay of sewer is as well as water in those areas.
So we can look at these maps over here in terms of sewer and water. So we can, and that's one of the things is if we're not going to use that broad red boundary, right, we're going to need to define that exactly as you said.
Yes.
There's no sewer at all. If we're talking about these areas in through here that matches up with a lot of those prime soils, there's no sewer here at all, anywhere. No sewer. The water lines are right here. So there are water lines along 5 and 20. There are water lines kind of in this same, here's 5 and 20 right here. Cooley Road has water, obviously, going down towards Hickox Road in here. And then there's water, this is County Road 32, I believe. Bristol Road, yeah, County
Yeah.
Road 32. And then 21 has water. So there is water in that general area there, but there is no sewer.
So if we put that red overlay on the reduced area, over which roads would that cover?
So that's to be determined. That's where I need you guys to help me.
Yeah.
I don't know. Do you go, do you drive, and of course, this map doesn't have specific identities, but do you come down Woolhouse Road, down? I don't know.
Yeah, well, I would
Or
think
do you
so.
keep
For
it?
that reference, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, that's a large farm area. There is an active farmer. There is a plan to go ahead and pass the farm down to Donnie Miller for another generation.
Mhm.
I think you gotta think about that. And, so we're talking about Baba Farms as well. In those areas, those are the two main farms in that particular area.
are
So-
Rogers in there or are they beyond?
How do you go ahead and is that a good enough definition? And then the areas, the farmers, that the farmers are farming that are leased lands also are probably pretty important to the income of the farmers that are farming there. Would that be something of, interest, to the group to consider? Are there others that I'm missing?
I mean, that would cover most of that land. I think if you.
Well, Brocklebanks are in there too, right? Just
Yeah.
north of Baba.
If you went down to most of the green stops and that around. If you went from like there to there, we cover most of that.
Yeah.
Prime.
Or maybe a little north of that.
So, well, you do have the Pedalford
Oh, right,
Greenway up
right,
here,
right.
right? And so you do have some protected there, but if you, you could generally define, this is what County Road 30.
Right.
If you said County Road 30 south
Mhm.
to.
Like Woolhouse Road.
I should know, but I just don't know. My head, I don't know what that little side road is. I keep looking at it over there. Is that Rozier Road?
Rossier Road.
Or not road? Maybe it's not road.
Not road is, Rozier is beyond not.
Yeah, right. I think this is Rozier. I think this is not.
So you go, there's a Burt Farm that's through
Yeah.
there as well. So you have to consider that as well. And Sam Casella is down there. I don't know how much farming he's doing, but I know that the land is being used for farming at this point.
So it's usually easier to define these maps when we're following roads.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, yeah.
So if we did whichever road,
Well, then
it-
go down to Woolhouse
wherever,
Road.
Yeah.
and we could say, County Road 30 may be a good northern boundary.
I would think.
Because it kind of cuts all the way up through there, right? And then
Sure.
just say
Sure.
south of County Road 32, wherever.
And if the road isn't really adequate to cover, farm fields that are in active production, perhaps a latitude or a longitude might be appropriate as well.
So if we made that the upper boundary, then. What roads do we have towards the bottom there? Maybe, yeah, that's where you just pointed.
Yeah.
So there's no names on there.
Yeah, there's two names on that map. That is,
online.
right, we can. That's where Kramer Road comes up and over to Rozier and goes all the way across. Right there. That could certainly be. Now, So here's the other question, I guess. So hypothetically, let's say you chose
Most of
County Road
Cheshire.
30 and Rosier Road as the northern and southern. Do you include all this stuff that's not in the strategic farmland protection area? Or do you just say those prime soils in the strategic farmland protection area between County Road 30 and Rosier Road? You know what I'm,
Well, help us out there. What do you think?
well, so.
I'd say all the way over to the edge of the town, but
So they tried to, I know when Barbara Johnson created the strategic farmland protection area with Labella, she intentionally, and it was this big thick red line on purpose so that it wasn't specifically identifying, right?
Mhm.
But she tried to follow the prime soils as much as possible. But you do have these areas out here, if we're gonna follow Rosier Road across, which is this road here, you have all this area. I don't know if anything's being farmed there or not.
I don't know either, but I would also say which lands, add another dimension to this, and which lands are in jeopardy of development or under significant pressure for development. And what lands in this area are directly, adjacent to where there is sewer or proposed sewer.
anything next to Middle Road,
Yeah,
all the way from,
But as you go more west there to that, outside of the red boundary, yeah. So
Cheshire.
there's no, unless you're. There's not a lot of, there's not much sewer over that way.
There's no.
None.
No.
So so if you protect to those, to the east of it, or limit sewer coming from the east, there's not much
danger. Whatever.
risk or danger of
Yeah.
sewer.
It's less for sure, right? The one area that you run into is the hamlet of Cheshire down here, right? Cheshire
Yeah,
has had mixed opinions about the need for Cheshire for quite a long period of time.
the need for a sewer, you mean?
Yeah.
Yes, and so at our most
Yeah.
recent meeting, the majority of the residents said no, but that goes back and forth, right? So.
So Goodale Road that comes out of Cheshire
Mhm.
is really,
That's all farm.
that's all farmed down
Yeah,
through
that's,
there.
who was it? It was Warner's. I don't know who's farming.
I
it
don't
now,
know. who's
But
farming
someone's
that.
farming it.
But is it important for us to consider that? Is that important? Or is that not really under pressure?
I think if it's near Cheshire, it's probably,
Yeah.
could be under pressure.
So, yeah.
Well, you have less of the green is the only thing.
True, less,
Right.
that's not the best soil, but
Mhm.
it's true, but it is being farmed.
That's really rocky soil. I know that area is very rocky and sandy soil. It'd be great for grapes. For vineyards.
Gotta sell the grapes.
Yeah.
If we extended it more west, would that really make a difference that we're coming outside of the strategic farmland area with an overlay?
Well, I think there's less development pressure, so I don't know that it matters as much right now. I guess, do your efforts get diluted would be my only question
that's-
for you, right? If you're
Exactly.
trying to.
Yeah, that's really a fact.
Good point, yeah.
So when you consider all of that, you also have to take into consideration the political will and desire of the town and the town board to go ahead and have something that's, really enforceable, if you will. Maybe enforceable is not the right word.
But it is the right word.
Well, maybe it is. So, when you think of that, I mean, Doug, you certainly have your finger on the pulse of what's happening in the politics of this. We don't want to overreach, in our recommendation.
Well, I think that's what Bob was alluding to when our original version of the strategic farmland protection overlay area. I think that there was some concern from some of the board and everything about maybe too much of a reach, too much of an overreach in telling private landowners that they weren't going to be able to develop, right? And that original version that we had so much, oh yeah, there you go, she's got it up
Just
there.
shame.
That original version had maybe too many restrictions, I think was the feedback generally, Bob, that we got at the ordinance committee,
Yeah,
right?
that makes sense.
Yeah.
So if we're going to do something, if we're asking the town board to put into town code that we don't envision sewer specifically, or to think twice before you run utilities into these areas, I don't necessarily see that we're restricting a private landowner's rights in any way, right? Because it's a town board action. At least it's in the code someplace that, hey, we really do envision these being prime soils and we want to try to protect these. And so please think twice before you do run sewer. So it's more than what we have currently, but it's a lot less than really preventing development, because even if it went forward the way it is and everybody said, yeah, we can live with that, and developer X comes in and says, I want to put a housing development right there, and I'm going to pay for the sewer to put it in there, probably could.
So how much of a cost does it have to be? How high of a wall do we have to build in order to make it prohibitively costly for that developer to actually do that?
We can't, can
Yeah, it's so tough
we?
because
I'd like to.
there's so many
They don't
market
listen to me.
conditions, right?
I'm playing devil's advocate, right?
Right. So there's so many market conditions. I was just on a real estate webinar today where they were talking about the market for our area and the supply and demand situation, and how the supply is so low. It's a historic lows in terms of housing for the Rochester and Finger Lakes region. There's a supply index that they use with a scale of 10, and a good average is 4.0, a mixture of supply and demand. And the current index is 0.6 for our area. The supply is just so low. And so they're talking about
So far,
home sales of
Well-
110 to 120% above the listing
I was gonna
price.
say the average is almost 20. I know that.
And what they're saying is, even as interest rates go up 7, 8, 9% interest, they don't see a lessening of the demand until we get into double-digit interest rates. It's going to continue.
Do they know why this is?
Well, that's the question that we all keep asking, right? And I was just at a conference last week in Boston with 170 municipal managers. And the thing that just floors me is everybody from every state in the Northeast is having the same exact issue. There is lower supply and
But
higher
the supply
demand.
hasn't gone and changed, has it?
Well, they're saying, yeah, the demand was decreasing even before the pandemic. They actually showed today a very interesting graph, and I'm just going to show.
But I
you
mean,
the
houses
entire-
aren't going away or property's not going away.
Well, but it's the population, right? So what they were showing is in the last 12 years, a 12-year timeline here, that the demand or the supply of housing was already decreasing even before the pandemic. And then when we got to March of 2020, it went like that. And then it kind of tapered off until December of 2020, and it dropped again. And that's where we're at the 0.6. And the demand or the supply level is so far below what it was in even 2017. Because there's just that many more people that are purchasing homes now in our area, and the supply just cannot keep up with the demand.
Is
So
this single family residences or is this?
It's across the board.
multifamily?
It was an average across the board.
So is it just the increasing population?
It's increasing population. We're seeing, I think the last number I saw was there was an 8% decrease in housing in New York City. And so they're converting even some of the office space and everything to housing. The population has shifted out of some of the larger cities into more areas
I
with
think
remote
that's-
work and everything else. We've also seen a fair amount of money come out of the stock market over the last couple of years with the pandemic and investing in real estate.
Yeah, that's probably it right
I
there.
think
Well,
that's a big
I
piece of
have
it.
heard that too. They
Yeah.
they want you to rent your house instead of own it, or
Right.
these big real estate management companies.
And then with the supply chain issues, right, it takes longer and it's more complicated to build a new house. And so the supply just isn't able to keep back up. And so we're at these historically low numbers. I want to see if I can get the folks that did the presentation today to come and do a presentation for us on some
So-
level, but
So even in a major, less of a major metropolitan area like the Rochester area, we're experiencing the same influences that they would someplace like Orange County.
Apparently
or,
so.
Just north of the
Apparently.
city.
We are, the supply index for Erie County is 1.0, for Onondaga County is 1.2, and for Monroe and the Finger Lakes is 0.6. So our supply index is lower than even Buffalo.
But
or
we've been a
Syracuse.
hub of, I mean, Farmington of,
Yes,
in Hawaii, I don't know. I wish they'd all go away.
but you know what? I was seriously, I was in Boston and they're having the same exact issue. They're
Yes,
literally having the same exact issue. The supply isn't there. The
Everywhere.
average sale right now of a place in Boston is almost $5 million.
you couldn't pay me to live near Boston.
My daughter and son-in-law have been trying to buy a house in Montreal area for the last 2 years, and they have been outbid every single time. People are going in and offering, 30-40% above the asking price.
Right.
And there are people just lined up outside, the door to go ahead and make the offer. So they've decided to go ahead and wait and see what happens.
Do the realtors think this is going to end up like 08, or do they think,
They think this is a 10 to 15 year trend. Is the way this is going to.
and where are we in it? Year 2 or
Year
3?
Year
Yeah.
2. So going back to your
stinks.
question, Tim, if the developer can build 50 homes and sell them for $300,000 or $400,000 or $500,000, they might be willing to spend $1 million or $2
They
million
might,
to run the
yes.
sewer line over there.
That's,
When you take a look at the geography of some of these areas, how practical is it to go ahead and make, stuff flow downhill? It's being able to, for instance, putting a pumping station in for water
Mhm.
down Woolhouse Road, right where it goes past Knott Road. You have to get up over that knoll. And I know that they were taking a look of whether the pressure would be high enough to be able to push the water up and over that knoll, or whether a pumping station would be required. And I believe that a pumping station was required, and that was $1 million investment for that
Sure.
pumping station right there.
Right.
for water.
You're just
For
talking about
water.
for water. You're not talking
Just
about
for
sewer.
water.
And that is,
Right. And
So
then the
That's not
sewer,
today.
the sewer stuff, I mean, you have to have lift stations, pump stations, force mains, everything, those get very expensive too.
So how practical is this area for supporting something like that?
Depends on how,
It depends, right? It depends on the market conditions. So, that map up there with the green,
it's a
where
pond.
sewer is envisioned going out to Route 21, you see, so even like, I know we've had a lot of conversations about that Miller parcel, right? That the Piercebrook subdivision now at the corner of 21. But see, sewer was always envisioned, even when we did the sewer master plan in 2016, sewer was envisioned in that area. I think it becomes pretty easy for developers to build in that green area on that map up there.
Oh, it's-
Now, that's the east side of 21. We're talking about this area on the west side of 21, right? That does become a little bit more challenging, but is it possible for a developer to run a sewer line across the street? Sure.
So I suppose that, just thinking about the specification for making stuff move downhill, to say that it has to be, a 5% grade or a 10% grade or something like that. And I'm just talking about the mechanics of
Right.
the process.
Well, it varies, right? Because the other factor is how deep do you go? So in some places, the sewer lines are so low that you can mitigate some of the grade stuff. If you're 20, 30 feet below ground with the sewer line, which some of them are,
Oh,
you
Okay.
can mitigate.
Sorry to go down that minutia.
No, but it all factors in, right? It definitely all factors in. And then you put in the lift stations. It's expensive, yes, but it's possible.
So how possible is it? Is it, guaranteed, or is it unlikely?
If we didn't, it's a combination, it's all the tools in the toolbox, right? So we have zoning as a tool in the toolbox up here behind Tim. That's the light green is the AR2, agriculture residential 2 acre minimums, right? And then the gray is the RR3. The water and sewer restrictions or lateral restrictions, that's another tool in the toolbox. The scenic view shed overlay, it's another tool in the toolbox. All of these different things are tools in the toolbox. If we didn't have any tools in the toolbox and it was just wild, wild west, you'd have houses developments popping up everywhere.
everywhere.
Is the sewer system capable of handling a lot more?
So all of predominantly the sewer system now for the town of Canandaigua, except for the very northern end, feeds into the county distribution system, which goes back into the city's wastewater treatment facility, which I believe is about 60% the capacity left. Yeah. So,
Capacity left or be, Yeah.
So there's 40 no restriction there.
Yeah.
And that's the city and the town combined.
Mhm.
Well, that's the city. They treat everything. They from all their,
Right,
so even like
okay,
Hopewell comes into that. And Gorham,
Yeah.
part of that, I believe Gorham comes up to it and everything. So the distribution system is where you run into some more of the issues. That's the stuff Tim was talking about with the lifts and the lower, you know, and then the pumping and all that sort of stuff. But then you get into grinder systems and any number of different mitigation measures that people start looking at. So
Macerators.
a lot of the folks on Westlake Road, well, like Davidson Landing is a perfect example of that. Davidson Landing in the town of Canandaigua, that's way down, right? So it's the sewer line is on
Yeah.
County Road 16, Davidson Landing is way down below. So they put in grinder stations or lift stations to be able to pump that back up to the sewer main to go up County Road 16. Money was no object, right? They wanted to build multi-million-dollar homes down in there, and so.
I don't think that anybody's gonna want to build a multi-million-dollar home in the middle of the agriculture district.
I would agree that, and that's all about the risk, right? The risk tolerance and it's not as much development pressure there,
So,
but
so with that said, you know, where should we set the lines? And, you know, with the political situation, you know, we don't want to overreach. That's for sure. Is Goodale Road overreaching? Yeah, I think it might be. You know, especially when you take a look at the prime farmland and how much prime farmland there is that far south compared to, you know, the main green plot areas that are a lot more defendable.
Yeah, and I think we'd be better to do something to have another tool. And even if it's a little less than we might want,
How
That
about
way.
Rossier Road then? That's pretty reasonable.
where is it there on that map?
The one that goes,
That one there, yeah,
Last year, I
okay,
believe,
yeah,
was this one.
that seems pretty reasonable.
just double check that.
And then that's not road is the next one, isn't
And
it?
then not road, I believe that's the next one up there. This map has it. Let's see, there's Rossier Road,
Yeah.
here's not road.
Rossier Road would make a good boundary.
There's a beautiful view up across here.
Yes.
It is gorgeous to take a look right down the south end of the lake.
just north of Cheshire.
Right, well, the one thing about that is, you know, we don't, at this point, we don't think Cheshire's gonna have sewer, but you never know, right?
No,
'Cause
you
the-
never
the-
know,
The
yeah.
opinion goes back
Never
and
know.
forth. And so it would at least, in terms of really trying to focus your protection area, leave Cheshire south of that, so that whatever ends up getting decided.
Look at Bristol Harbor.
So with that said, that's the south side. And we have said right up to the Paddleford Brook area, County Road 30 is the other side. And
And make the red line the western boundary.
I would say right up
East
to
and
the
west.
edge of 5 and 20, but that's already gone.
Yes.
And there's
So here's
sewer
5
right
and
there.
20 right here.
So just keep it right in the red line.
North and south.
On this side of 21.
The red line right here, in terms of 5 and 20, this is actually the town hall complex right here, so it's right at
It's what?
this is the town hall complex right here.
Oh,
So we're literally, the red line is right at the town hall complex, so you're talking about everything west there. Then it comes down, wraps around, and this is 21, right? So it follows 21 where it makes the turn and goes down.
You heard that.
There may be a little bit of overlap, maybe a little bit of overlap with our strategic forest protection area, which is on this map over here. You see how it kind of wraps around. It's this yellow line, orange line, whatever you want to call it. And it wraps around. There would be some overlap in this area here of the two. But much like the strategic farmland protection area, this was an area that's designated as part of the open space of, hey, there's a prime amount of forests and hardwoods in this area that deserve special consideration, but there's no regulations in place that would.
Well, that's for that committee to take a look at.
Correct. Correct. My phone is going crazy, sorry.
That's just a file of me. It's town lot number 9.
I'm still.
For everything itself is lot number 9.
Oh, in the back in the Phelps.
Yeah, and
Oliver
they never
Phelps.
wanted
Purchase.
to, they said it would never be, you had to have real farmers. Excuse me, but to have even think
As
about.
opposed to you and I. but
Farming that.
Yeah, farming.
It depends on how hungry we all
Yeah.
get down the
Yeah.
road, whether you can farm that or not.
But that was the line.
Yeah.
Was not late, not when they're 9, and this is 10
Mhm.
above it.
So we seem in agreement about that. So what do we need to do to move forward with it?
I'll need to update the map based on this conversation to define the specific area. Can we just look at basically, can you pull up maybe the Word document or the red line version, whichever one?
I'll pull up Fernando's questions too, just so we can
Okay.
bring them up now.
So the first section here is just talking about the intent, and that really hasn't even changed since the version that we looked at in 21 that talks about the intent of this article is to encourage viable farming economy and community to promote agriculture in the town of Canandaigua by creating an overlay district of parcels 7 acres or more in all areas identified as part of the town of Canandaigua strategic farmland protection area. So I have to further define that as the area that we just talked about.
Why 7 acres? Which is.
Well, that's
Well-
the ag exemption, right? That's usually what we use because that's where that kicks in.
Thank you.
And so just 1 minute, because that's something Fernando had a question about while we're discussing that.
Mhm.
So he was concerned about land being subdivided in that, the ability to subdivide land in that area so that it became less than 7 acres. And then you might be able to do other things with it. Is that a concern?
Well, you would be.
No,
able to-
read that verbatim, what he said. That was kind of, he's worried about him taking 7 acres and making it into 6 parcels or something.
Yeah, so
Oh,
the need for a provision so land does not get subdivided below the 7 acres so the land remains covered under these provisions.
So
Is that-
that would actually be, okay, so
That's a zoning.
that's a
thing.
zoning, right? So that's what we're trying to stay away from. So
Yeah.
the area that we're talking about is in the light green, which is agriculture residential 2 acre minimum. So the acreage would have to be a minimum of 2 acres. And it would have to have the minimum number of road frontage for the parcel to be subdivided. So if it's a 7 acre parcel with, well, if it's a 7 acre parcel, the most that you could get out of it is 3 lots essentially, because it's 2 acre minimum, right? Depending on the road frontage, because we don't allow flag lots and there's a whole variety of other things. So it would limit it, that's the zoning issue. But that's, I thought what we were trying to stay away from is getting into the regulatory.
Well, yeah, because I think there's much less chance of us getting very far doing that.
Exactly.
Yes.
And there's probably, I mean, yeah, people could put a couple houses here and there, but there's not a lot of risk of, that's still not a lot of risk of a big development.
Right.
I don't know if there's a lot of risk of having of someone wanting to build 2-3 houses all over the place.
Right,
Unless
and
it's
and if
individual
they
people, I
did
don't
do the 2 or 3 houses, they could do that on septic systems without doing the sewer. It's when
Yeah.
they get to 4 that it
Yeah.
triggers the sewer. The rest of this intense section, farms provide jobs and support the local economy, fresh fruit, fresh foods, and rural character and scenic landscape while requiring easy for me to say, fewer community services. Furthermore, farms maintain wildlife habitat and other natural resources. This article seeks to sustain these important contributions provided by local farm to residents of the town of Canandaigua. The next section, if you just scroll down a little bit for me, this talks about the purpose being to encourage agriculture, to encourage other economic activities such as forestry, recreation, vineyards, provide an opportunity to balance growth, viable farming, coordinate town of Canandaigua comprehensive plan and a variety of our planning documents. Just scroll down a little bit more for me there, Kim, sorry. Then this is just definitions. So this next section, so it leaves the agriculture overlay district, right? And then the right to engage in agricultural practices for that. And if you can keep scrolling, I think it strikes out almost everything else, right?
Or did you remove it?
Oh, you know what, this isn't the red line version. So there was a whole bunch more sections that were in here that we struck out because this really limits this and keeps it specifically micro focused on new infrastructure. So
Would you
that's
pause
this
for
new
a second,
section.
Doug?
Sure.
And take a look at paragraph B that we were just looking at.
I think I have the red line one.
No, right above where the yellowed out area B is, there shall exist a presumption that no agricultural use that conforms to all relevant federal, state, or local state statutes, rules, and regulations or ordinances, and which does not pose a direct threat to public health and safety shall constitute a public nuisance. What does that mean?
So shall constitute a public nuisance, nor shall any such use be deemed otherwise invade or interfere with the use and enjoyment of any other land or property. So that's actually boilerplate language from Ag and Markets that essentially says, as long as there's no public nuisance, as long as there's no threat, as long as it's not interfering with any other uses or regulations, and it can probably be wordsmith there a little bit, that basically agriculture should be allowed as right use to operate and to continue,
Am I missing something, or should that state it shall not constitute? a
which
public
does not pose a direct threat to public health and safety. I think it probably, instead of shall, should say which constitutes a public nuisance, right? Because it's relative to
Yeah.
the public health and safety.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
So that just needs to be,
Who decides what the public nuisance is?
well, there's definitions of public nuisance. So,
Roosters crowing, the
Oh,
whole
that
town of
was-
Canandaigua smelling like cow poop.
but ultimately,
Well,
the
that
town
can
board
happen.
is the.
I know it does.
For it seats as.
I
the
live
Board of
next to
Health.
an 800 cow
So
dairy.
if there's a huge issue,
Oh,
which
it's
has
bad
gotten to
when
the
it's
point
bad.
of it's not safe for people to live around it, they can act and then condemn.
Like cows.
Well,
I
I suppose
doubt that the board
theoretically,
would.
probably, with the liquid manure now, it's just gotta be managed better.
But good
so.
point, Tim, that's gotta be wordsmith there a little bit.
I would say, and does not
Because it says exactly the
Uh,
opposite of what it means, I
hyphen
think.
pose a direct threat to public health. Semicolon, and shall not constitute. a public nuisance.
Okay, we'll work on that. Then the next section here is the new infrastructure. Kim, can you pull the red line just so we can look at that for a quick second? This is the red line, so.
There's a lot
Yeah,
of them.
so, okay, so you see all this other stuff is taken out, a lot of these other pieces, and then we get into definitions and keep going.
So a lot of the red line stuff were limitations.
It's
on-
all taken out, right? That's all the agriculture, that's all the definitions that really defined what you can and can't do, and the tourism. There you go, all that stuff coming out. Really, really simplifies this to a really narrow focus, micro focus. And then that last section is the section added there, the new infrastructure. So any decision to expand public water or sewer lines should consider limiting, minimizing, or mitigation of the expansion of water or sewer services to avoid those areas in the agricultural protection overlay district. So obviously that has to be further defined based on this conversation. Any expansion of publicly owned water or sewer lines in the agricultural protection overlay district must be approved by the town board of the town of Candida. That specifically is so that the town planning board can't just approve something like a
Without-
development going in without the town board first approving the expansion of those lines.
And that's what we're after, right?
So this is code,
It's proposed code, right?
proposed code.
Yeah, so it would go in the town code, right? Obviously, it has to be wordsmith. We'll have to bring it back to make sure we captured everything we talked about tonight, but
Well, I'll be very interested to see the, the next draft.
Which we will see, right?
We can have that by the next meeting and then hopefully vote on it to advance it.
Right.
We've been doing a lot of talking for a long time, so we finally need to, I think, like you said, a
Well-
tool, if we can, so something like this too, because it's not new zoning or anything, could be added to a bit at some point or changed if we, like, an overlay.
well, it could always be changed, but it would have to go through the same process. Town board would have to hold a public hearing on it and update the code and stuff, but yeah. Code gets changed all the time, so. That's
If we
what
get-
keeps the
if we-
ordinance committee in business.
If we get something in there, it's better than having
Right.
nothing.
Well, you can't help but think development pressure is going to increase based on that graph.
Right.
I mean, because eventually building supplies will be available and eventually, I don't know where people get all the money to do all this stuff.
It's
There
crazy.
seems
I
to
see
be-
houses in my neighborhood. It's so unbelievable what
Yeah,
we're going for. But
it
even,
is.
even if you sell your house for that much money.
You still have to have
buy
a place to
another one
live.
for just as much money. So
Exactly.
it's-
Just move further out.
It's just like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how far, they're expensive everywhere. My cousin lives in Maine and housing is crazy up there.
I heard North Dakota's giving away 160 acres. All you have to do is move there and
I
stay
think
on the
that
land
was,
for
I
10
think that
years.
was a couple hundred years ago. but
No,
maybe
it's still,
not.
it's still there today.
Well, I know someone who just went back there, so maybe I'll give them a call.
We have some younger people working for us trying to buy their first
Yeah.
homes and that's.
Same with my kids. They
Possible.
can't, they
Yeah.
just can't.
That's right. It is.
I mean,
impossible.
some of my
We
kids, some
do
of them.
have, we've requested, and the county has agreed to a step one, do a housing analysis. And it's specifically being called housing analysis of what's going on in the county, what the needs are, what the current situation is in Ontario County. And it's being, the word housing without an adjective is being used intentionally so that it can include affordable housing, it can include current conditions in housing markets, and it can include farm labor housing, it can include all those different components. So they're going to be doing that inventory and working on that. And so we have a starting point and then what needs to happen from there. We're seeing pretty substantial number of people living in hotels, motels, those types of things. Because of exactly what you guys are talking about. Somebody may have sold their house and then move into an apartment because they can't afford to buy something, right? But the people that were in that apartment, the owner of the apartment complex jacked the rent up, right? So the rent's going up. So the people that were there can no longer afford to live there, senior or otherwise, right? So now they're moving someplace and then it's like the domino effect, right? And then you get to the point where somebody doesn't have somewhere to go. Right?
One of the girls helping taking care of my mother, they just moved into an apartment in Penn Yan and their rent is $1,600 a month.
Ridiculous.
1,600 and it's just an apartment. It's that Cuca housing or it's not the low income, but 1,600 a month. So they can't save money to buy a house and they can't afford.
Right. The one thing I think that this, or at least I think the intent behind this code would be generally when the planning board or even this group is meeting, this committee is looking at a project or a housing development or whatever, it's implied, hey, let's try to stay out of the strategic farmland protection area, right? Where at least then there would be something in code to at least say, okay, we got to think
We're
about the
thinking
water
about
and
this,
sewer,
yeah.
if nothing else.
So this is the tool. that we're gonna add to the toolbox by limiting the region that we're going to protect with these additional, hand tools, if you will, that lead to the entire tool shop, I guess.
Right.
And so summarization of what are those hand tools in this toolbox that we're going to add?
So specifically, this piece of it would be this going into code says before the planning board can't just approve a development to go out here, right? The town board would have to approve sewer going to it. And the town board would then have to look at this section of code and say, is that really the best place for sewer or no? Now, it doesn't say they can't do it, right? Town board always has the ultimate say. They could change the code. They could strike this if they wanted to, or not adopt it even if they wanted to. But it would at least force that conversation, at
They're gonna pump the brakes.
least slow it down a little, right?
So it's not everything that you want,
Well,
but it's better.
something,
Well,
something.
compromise a little bit and get something.
Right.
Really a lot of that, so a lot of that land in that area, I would say is not even real high risk because it's being farmed by farms that plan to continue farming. It's just to keep some of it from continuing to creep in.
Hopefully.
But money talks.
you know.
Yeah.
It does, there's just,
Yeah, you never know what, something happens to somebody.
Who owns Snowball Farm that's down the road from Woolhouse Road from where I am? They built a new barn on
Snowball?
Woolhouse Road. I think it's Snowball. Maybe.
Like horses or something.
There were
Driven by
horses
there.
and then they had llamas there and ducks. Yeah. Just curious.
All right,
Okay.
we'll get that back out to you, Bob. Changes and stuff.
One other comment that Fernando had, and I don't think it would work, but I'll bring it up because he wanted us to talk about it. If someone wanted to sell their land, if we could request that the first right of refusal be given to anyone that wants to use it for agricultural purposes before they can sell it. I don't.
that
think
sounds great, but that's
I don't
like
think that's possible.
pie in the sky to me.
The farmer's gonna offer you $2,000 for
Exactly,
farmland.
About-
The developer's gonna
For
offer,
Yeah, I don't,
200,000.
yeah, a little bit more.
I do think that that could be part of the conversation with the conservation team that we're trying to get off the ground. Conservation, there's a real opportunity for us to define a conservation program for the town of Canandaigua. It could be any number of things. You guys are very familiar with PDR. We've talked about that many different times, but there could be other opportunities that could involve TDR. It could involve publicly owned land. It could be involved privately owned conservation easements. It could involve these types of things like first right of refusals. We're in desperate need of a team leader for that group. So we had the kind of the kickoff meeting back in February, and that group has not yet met. We're looking for some help to try to get that up and running.
What are you calling it?
Conservation, I think we call it the conservation team. But it's looking at all of those types of things and really kind of coming up with a program that could be adopted eventually by the town that would have multiple avenues. I think it would have probably at least 5 or 6 different avenues in it. And there's interest in exploring this whole concept of conservation, and it could be for farmland, it could be for natural resource protection, it could be the forest protection area, it could be the conservation, it could incorporate all these different types of things in different avenues. But there's some work to do relative to that. So I feel like that what he's talking about would actually be something good for them to discuss, because I think it fits right into the programming aspect.
Maybe you could be the team leader. then.
Yeah, maybe we can talk him into it. So.
If you don't come to
He
meetings,
always
that's
seems
how
to
you
think
get.
he's pretty
That's
busy.
right.
That's right. You don't show up, you get nominated.
I'll let them know.
You just been elected, right?
Does he do your nutrition work?
No.
did nutrition work. He said.
He doesn't do ours though.
Who does yours?
Aaron, neighbor.
Oh.
Anything else?
Are you done with the Ferdinand's
Fernandez.
list?
Yep.
Then goes.
Watching the transcription up here,
It's pretty funny.
Pretty interesting.
it is. It just says Fernand pregnant.
Yeah.
Well, those things can happen
Look at
nowadays.
pretty
you know?
Fernand is pregnant now out there. Boy. Are we done?
No other town news that we need to know about?
Town news, let's see, a couple of quick things. June 18th is the tentative ribbon cutting for Motion Junction. That's the new inclusive playground. Around Ellensburg. Obviously, I think everybody's aware the YMCA is undergoing construction up there. We've got a new, some of the new video digital billboards will be going up the first part of June, the first week of June, the one on 332 goes up.
Where's the YMCA being built?
In front of Constellation Brands.
So that's
Yeah.
what the construction.
Just
Oh,
by the
yeah.
civic center. Did they donate that property by any chance?
Maybe.
The Sands Family YMCA. That's actually the name of it, I believe. So,
I was wondering
Do you know
why
what's
some
gonna
moving
happen
up
to the
there.
other one? What,
looking to repurpose and do some housing and some different things.
housing
Oh, they should.
with a
put
nice
s-
big pool in
They
it?
should put senior housing in there. They really should.
They never should have left the city. When they went to the town, sorry. With the new post office.
Oh,
That's still in the city. It's the city there. The
Is it?
post office is the city.
Just,
I get your point though.
Yeah.
It's a very nice building, you know, where the Y is today.
yeah,
But I don't even see how that would convert to housing very well.
You go up into this third floor where all of the,
It's still small though.
you could go ahead and build multiple apartments up there. Lots and lots of apartments.
Oh, they'll have a nice pool anyways.
Yeah, and you have.
That was sort of short-sighted, that whole deal. I think.
Convert the racquetball courts back to racquetball courts. I wouldn't mind living there. So,
okay,
what are they gonna do with all the fill that's coming out of there?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, there's always a need for a fill around different places. I think some of it they're gonna have to repurpose, but I haven't heard anything specific yet at this point.
And they were, you may recall that I got like 500 truckloads and it turns out it was all clay.
So,
So I.
Right.
Oh, is it- is it subsoil?
go further.
we, there's always such a need for
Pearl? Yeah.
for
then
clean
John,
soil, right? And then, I know we still need soil out here for the ball
Yeah.
field. out on the playground
that
and all that
corner
stuff.
of North Street.
Yeah.
Right.
I can't
That's small
compete.
compared to what you need though.
Yeah, I can't. Well, I'll take
We
just
have-
enough. to
We
get-
have some soil down here under a tarp. You're welcome to.
I'd have to get it to my house first,
They,
right out around the barn. If I could get it around the barn, it would keep that dry, you know, because after it all, it's, they're not listening. It is a historic barn and it's on the historic barn list for Ontario County. And I have
We-
about,
we
I have
put
about
every-
$1,000
every
worth of siding in my
barn.
horse trailer back there that I'm gonna
just,
reside the barn on the south side to make it look better, but it's pretty dry right now. I just need a little bit more work.
Hey, Ray, have you heard anything? Remember how the state used to have that barn program for the historic? They're not.
It was, I tried to get that too. I tried to get everything. It's been that went on for 20, at least 10 or 15 years, yeah. Well, like they have to be-
Left.
It has to get funded, yeah. And people in the city don't see any particular reason to
Yeah.
keep old barns around, so.
The ones that got the money, they did some nice work, but
There's one in Rushville, they fixed you. Anyways, that all disappeared.
I'll continue to try to preserve what I got.
I had fun on the.
Start a
fun, huh?
GoFundMe.
Yep, we had our first meeting last night. And actually,
Did
your name came up
Oh.
about your paid demonstration.
Oh,
So
good.
you want to do it, I assume.
I
What
have a
was
hay
that again?
system in my barn.
We're
Is that with the
starting,
big forks
fork,
of the
yeah.
trout? Yeah.
we started planning for Fun on the Farm.
Oh, yeah.
Block and tack.
Yeah.
And the big rail that goes all the way across.
Yeah, wood or metal.
The rails are metal.
It's all
Well,
there.
they're-
It's gotta be.
Some of the old ones had wood.
Yeah, I don't know.
Barn's 250 years, maybe 225.
How old?
225 is what you told me.
No. I didn't tell you that.
I think it's 1825.
Okay, it's old.
Our house is
Yeah, it's hard
eighteen
to believe
sixteen.
anymore.
My
That's
house
the
is
deed is-
1850. They built the barn before they built the
Eighteen
house.
sixteen, yeah, the barns don't
Well,
last that
that-
long.
that- Of course, that makes sense. It was first one out there next to the, probably was a barn or a house before it was a barn.
Makes sense, because there are different sections that were built at different times. Yeah,
Or not.
we're not, who knows?
Yeah.
Who knows?
Well, it's nice to see everybody.
All right, I wish
on
you
our
adjourned.
Computer.
Second, third.
Passes unanimously.
Well, the neighbors didn't see who has that.